The story of the Ohio fisherman who claimed to have lost time while out on the water is one of the most quietly unsettling encounters ever featured on The Proof Is Out There. Unlike some cases that rely heavily on sensational claims, dramatic footage, or exaggerated witness testimony, this incident stands apart for how ordinary the circumstances initially were. Two men, a familiar lake, a night of fishing, and an event that neither of them could explain days, months, and even years later. The incident has been revisited repeatedly by researchers in UFO studies, psychologists examining anomalous memory disruption, and skeptics who attempt to unravel stories that appear to defy the known rules of time and physical reality. Yet, despite those attempts, the core details have not shifted. The two men insist that what happened to them was real, and that the missing hours, the strange light, and the overwhelming feeling of something being wrong were not imagined, misunderstood, or misremembered. Instead, they believe they were taken, examined, or moved by something not human. The setting of the event is as ordinary as it gets, a lake in rural Ohio, surrounded by quiet forests and open stretches of water that attract fishers in the warm months. The two men were experienced outdoor enthusiasts. They were comfortable with the lake, the currents, the night sky, and the sounds of wildlife that tend to fill the dark. Both had spent many nights fishing there before. They were not drinking, they were not using drugs, and they were not involved in any activity that might have caused hallucinations or confusion. Their plan for the evening was simple: fish for several hours after sunset, pack up before midnight, and return home. But by the next morning, everything they believed about their sense of time and memory had shifted. They could not account for several hours. Their watches did not match their internal sense of passing time. Their memories seemed interrupted, as though something had erased a part of the night. Their story begins with a bright light. Not the kind of light one might expect from a passing boat, a flashlight, or distant headlights. This light seemed to hang in the sky above the lake, silent and unmoving at first. The men initially assumed it was an aircraft, maybe a helicopter, possibly even a flare. But as they continued to observe it, they realized it was not behaving like any known object. It did not drift. It did not blink with the familiar rhythm of aircraft lights. It simply hovered. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to move. The men described it as gliding in a nonlinear path, shifting directions in ways that defied the flight characteristics of conventional aircraft. It moved without sound. No engine hum, no vibration through the air, no disruption to the natural sounds around them. Silence is often described in such encounters, and here, too, silence was the first sign that something was highly unusual. The next memory the men shared was the feeling of pressure or weight in the air. Some experiencers describe this as atmosphere thickening, as though gravity had increased in some subtle but noticeable way. The men later said it was like the air itself felt heavier, harder to inhale. Their surroundings remained visible, their boat continued floating, the water remained calm, but there was a sense of something approaching, something that was not physically seen yet but was unmistakably present. And then their memories stopped. Not faded, not blurred, not confused. Stopped. The next moment one of the men remembered was a sudden awareness of the stars overhead. The light was gone. The boat was in a different part of the lake. Their fishing lines were no longer where they had been placed. Both men felt disoriented, nauseated, and extremely cold, despite the temperature not having changed significantly. They checked the time. Hours had passed. Hours they could not account for. They had believed only minutes had gone by. Their watches indicated that the night was nearly over, pushing toward dawn. Neither of them had experienced sleep, but both felt as though they were waking up from something. The missing time phenomenon is a core element of many close encounter cases. It refers to the psychological and physiological experience of having a period of time that cannot be recalled, remembered, or reconstructed through memory. It is not simply forgetting details. It is an absence of memory entirely, a blank space where time should exist. In typical cases, missing time is associated with extremely vivid sensory memories immediately before and after the gap. There is a moment of intensity, followed by silence or stillness, and then awareness returning abruptly. That pattern matches what the Ohio fisherman described. The men initially decided not to report the incident. They did not want to be ridiculed or dismissed. They feared that authorities would ask questions they could not answer. They were not interested in publicity or attention. But as days passed, other symptoms began to emerge. Both experienced vivid dreams that felt more like memories trying to push their way back. The men described scenes of being in a room with bright, cold light. They remembered figures that were difficult to see clearly, almost as if their minds refused to focus on them. They remembered a sense of being observed rather than harmed. There was no sensation of pain, but there was a strong emotional undercurrent of powerlessness, of being unable to move or speak even though they were aware of their surroundings. These recurring impressions pushed the men to seek help. They contacted researchers who were familiar with abduction and missing time cases, who recommended hypnotic regression therapy. Under regression, the men described nearly identical experiences. They recounted being taken from their boat, though the means of removal was unclear to them. They described being inside what seemed like a craft, though they could not identify its structure, materials, or interior shape in a familiar way. They remembered faint sounds similar to humming or vibrations, but still lacking the engine noise of any known aircraft. Most notably, they described entities that did not resemble humans, yet they did not use words like aliens or extraterrestrials. Instead, they described impressions. Tall, thin forms, large eyes, smooth movement, and communication that felt like thought rather than speech. Skeptics argue that hypnotic regression is unreliable, that the mind can create memories under suggestion, or that the images described are influenced by popular culture depictions of alien encounters. But the researchers who studied this case noted that the fishermen had no prior interest in UFO phenomena, no history of fascination with extraterrestrial theories, and no exposure to popular abduction narratives. Their descriptions were consistent with hundreds of other reports across decades, suggesting that either shared cultural imagery is much deeper and older than modern media, or that these encounters share a real, external source. The physical evidence from the case is subtle but noteworthy. The boat was later examined and found to have been moved through the water in a straight path that did not match wind, current, or paddle movement patterns. The fishing lines had been cut and reattached in ways the men did not remember performing. Their clothing contained small, circular marks that neither could explain, similar in shape and location on both of their bodies. The watches worn by the men both stopped for a period consistent with the missing time window, then restarted. It is possible for watches to malfunction, but simultaneous malfunction of two separate watches without any external shock or water damage is statistically unlikely. The emotional impact of the encounter is one of the most compelling parts of the story. The men were not seeking attention. They did not capitalize on their experience. They did not write books or launch documentary appearances immediately after. Instead, they struggled privately with what had happened. The lack of resolution, no clear explanation, no way to prove or disprove what they had experienced, became a psychological weight that affected their relationships, their sense of normalcy, and their comfort with the outdoors they had once enjoyed. Even years later, recounting the event caused visible emotional strain. The Ohio fisherman case stands as one of the strongest examples of a missing time encounter that involves multiple witnesses, consistent memory patterns, physical evidence consistent with disruption, and psychological responses aligned with trauma. It challenges those who wish to dismiss such stories as hallucination, fabrication, or confusion. Something happened that night. The men agree on that point with complete certainty. What that something was remains open to interpretation. A natural but unknown atmospheric anomaly, a psychological phenomenon, or an encounter with non-human intelligence. What makes this case enduring is not sensationalism but ambiguity. The unknown persists, and in that gap, between memory, time, and the unexplained, lies the unsettling realization that ordinary life can be interrupted without warning, without reason, and without leaving answers behind.